or this webinar? And there is a question already. Will we have the option to live chat? Yes, we will. I will get to that in a second. All right. So thank you for joining us. Like I said, we are here to hear more about Pulse, which is a design system for Teladoc Health. Next slide, please. So a little housekeeping. We do have a webinars channel in our Zero Slack community. If you're not part of the Zero Slack community, you can sign up with that URL. We'll also post that in the chat for you to click on. And definitely join us for our other events. We have a Design Systems Essentials webinar on hiring for design systems that's coming up on Tuesday. And on occasion, we'll host design system office hours in our Slack channel and also do a lot of new feature announcements. So you can hear about new features from Zeroheight as they're happening live. And next slide. So this year, we're hosting the first annual World Design Systems Week, which is happening in the third week of September, where there's global events all across the world. To learn more and participate or even start an event, it's not too late to host an event. You can go to designsystemsweek.com. We're also creating a video montage with questions and answers from design system makers, which you are welcome to participate in. Connie will post the links in the chat if you're interested in that as well. So yeah, we hope to have you participate in our World Design Systems Week. All right, next slide. Okay, so quick agenda. We're doing the welcome right now. The team will introduce themselves, kind of go over some diners and drives. They're also in 3 different locations, so we get to learn about 3 different sites, which is pretty fun. And then they'll do a design system tour. Toward the end, there will be some Q&A, so if you have questions, feel free to put it in the Slack channel. And it's also a great way, that way the Teledoc team will follow up with them after the webinar, and then we'll wrap up. I think the biggest thing to take away just right now is just be kind as you are talking in the Slack channel or in the chat. And yeah, I'll let them take it away. It's all yours, Evan.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. I really appreciate the intro. So, hey, everybody. We're the Pulse team from Teladoc Health. We have a couple people presenting today. So myself, my name is Evan Huntley. I'm a senior manager of product design. We have John Armstrong, who's a senior product designer, and Gabrielle Clark, who's a product designer on our team. Throughout today's presentation, we're going to say the word "we" a lot as we talk about some of the things that we've done, for our design system. I just want to state now emphatically, there are other members of our team. Some of them will be joining this call and listening in. John Salmon and Aida Mendoza, in particular, are key members of our team. So whenever we say we mean all of us. It takes a team to do everything that we're showing. We also had an engineering team join us around Q2. Before that, it had been kind of a little loosey-goosey with respect to engineering support. And we have TPM, we have QA now, so we want to kind of honor them as well, because it's just been a fantastic partnership as that has started to blossom. Cool, so I'm going to kick it off. As I mentioned, I'm Evan. We're going to jump right into diners. A little bit of geography here. I live in Wake Forest, North Carolina. I claim Raleigh, North Carolina, which is just down the road. And those that know the area will know that this restaurant is actually in Knightdale, North Carolina. Everything's within kind of 20 minutes, but it's prime barbecue. Now, I don't want to commit like a North Carolinian sacrilege here. I have to observe that this is not North Carolina style barbecue, technically. It is actually a Texas style barbecue, but the owner is a friend. I seem to run into NHL players every time I go there, which is really cool. And I think the food, the brisket pictured there and so on, kind of speaks for itself. So if you're in the area, definitely check it out. Okay, continuing sort of my Raleigh, but kind of not Raleigh theme. A couple drives that I think are fantastic in the area. So just down the road in Durham, if you've seen Raleigh Hype in Durham, we usually get kind of lumped in, even though they're a bit of a drive from one another, is the Durham Museum of Life and Science. Just a cool place to hang out with your family, run around. You can see pictured as, we have these tree houses that you can run around in, and they're actually a little higher off the ground than maybe they appear there. PNC Arena, I got a lot of flack when I was showing some friends this presentation for including PNC Arena. you can tell by the t-shirt, I'm a diehard Carolina Hurricanes fan. It's the loudest house in the NHL. And so I would be remiss not to include that. If you are at all a hockey fan, or even if you're not, a really cool place to go. And then the last thing for me is I think the cool part about Raleigh and this area in the Triangle is that we have the beach and the mountains within 2 hours to 3 hours, depending on where you're going, which is just a cool thing to be able to take a day trip to either one and kind of see some of the sites there. We've got Boone and then Topsail Beach. So yeah, I'm going to hand it over to John, and John's going to take us into the city.
Hi, I'm John Armstrong, and I live in Brooklyn, New York. So we have a diner across the street that's kind of our daily go-to, but this is a Brooklyn-y kind of diner. There's all kinds of artisanal ingredients in the sundae, and then there's fried chicken and waffles. But there's underneath that chicken, there's probably some really awesome vegetables that were grown like in the back and locally sourced and everything else. So highly recommend Buttermilk Channel. Great coffee, amazing pancakes. Okay, drives. So when in New York, no one really, I mean, there's very few people that actually own a car. And by the way, you do not want to drive in New York. Just pro tip. So my favorite drive is to get on the train at Grand Central Station and take the Metro North and ride along the Hudson River up to Croton Harmon. In the autumn, this is gorgeous. It's very peaceful. There's a whole bunch of stops. So there's, there's some, whatever. There's an express train if you want to just groove on the train. But this is a really lovely way to spend like an hour on the train. I will hand it over now to Gabrielle.
Hey everyone, my name is Gabrielle Clark. I actually recently relocated to the San Francisco area, and I'm not a huge diner girl, but I am very into baking and cooking. So I got a bakery for you. This is Arsico in the Inner Richmond area. They have fabulous croissants. I really love the ham and cheese croissant there, but they have a just stellar lineup of pastries all around. On the right though, I will warn you, if you're going to Arsico, definitely show up early or try and sneak in right before they sell out around like 1:30 or 2, because there's always a line every time I go, which must mean it's very good. Moving on to drives from the San Francisco area. Like I said, I recently moved here. There's tons of good day trips out of San Francisco, but this is one I've actually done already. I'm pretty centrally located in the Castro neighborhood, and I love to drive just kind of due west through the Sunset neighborhood. And then you can cruise all along the coast south on the Coast Highway 101. Gorgeous, bluffy coastline. You can get all the way down to Half Moon Bay, which is where the Maverick surf break is, if you've heard of that. Cute little artsy town, great spots to hike along the way, and just a really lovely view.
Awesome. Well, a lot of health food included in those first few slides. Definitely some places to check out though. We wanted to start out by kind of giving y'all a bit of a look at what Teladoc Health does. So I think kind of the general perception is, well, you do telemedicine, and we definitely do that. But there's a lot of different aspects in kind of the whole person care model that we're kind of espousing. And so we just added a couple of things here that we thought would be cool to highlight. So we do deliver primary care. I think a lot of people don't realize that. Mental health. We do have chronic condition management. So you can imagine the connected glucose monitor, for example, if you suffered from diabetes. We actually also have in-hospital solutions. And so we'll get to a little bit of that in terms of devices that we have to think about for the design system. In all of these arenas, we serve patients, but we also serve providers, administrators, and clients. Particularly on the provider side, you can imagine a provider has an interface where they're managing the visits that they may be handling that day and so on. So we have to kind of balance a couple of different user constituencies. And then ways of getting access. So, kind of how we do business. You can get Teledoc as a benefit through your employer, possibly through a health plan, or even in the health and hospital system context. So you might actually have it as a benefit and you don't realize it right now as we speak. Okay, so Pulse. We are the global design system for all Teladoc Health products. That is in some ways kind of new. I think prior when Pulse sort of started, It started as a design system for sort of one aspect, more in the chronic condition management kind of arena, and has kind of blossomed into something where we're covering all those areas. So we have a lot of products and a lot of needs to balance. We collaborate with about 45 team members in the product design organization, and that ranges from managers and designers to user experience research, design ops, and so on. The Scrum teams are almost innumerable. We have 40, at least 40. I stopped counting after that, over 14 different arts. So there's quite a few Scrum teams that we're working with and providing support to through the product design organization. Recently, we've started monthly syncs with the accessibility team, our content strategy team, design ops, as well as brand and marketing, just kind of as we look to scale as an enterprise design system team. We think it's critical that we partner closely with each of those disciplines. And then finally, I kind of alluded to this earlier, maybe spoiled it, but we have 11 new team members just kind of added in Q2 and Q3, all in the engineering and TPM and QA banner. So again, that's been a fantastic partnership. John's raising the roof. We're very, very excited to have the organizational buy-in to kind of have that engineering partnership. Okay, so some things that we have to balance, and we thought this would be relevant to note just because with a design system, everybody has their specific considerations that they're kind of handling. Here are some of ours. So healthcare is highly, highly regulated. Things like Section 508 compliance and accessibility, like not an option, not like a nice to have or hey, that's a good thing to do, but are an absolute must. We have to manage the needs of a couple different types of users, as I mentioned. That means different device contexts. So you see sort of on the right-hand side, we actually have TV products that occur sort of in the inpatient hospital setting. And so it's just another angle that we have to kind of manage with whatever we're doing. There's been a lot of mergers and acquisitions. So I mentioned earlier chronic condition management. That was actually an acquisition. So Teledoc bought Livongo. It's just a name you may or may not know. But as each of those acquisitions are made and the company kind of grows, we have brands to manage and integration points and teams that haven't necessarily used the design system and different angles that we have to think about there. White labeling is another thing that we offer. So their Teledoc services can be accessed through, a white label instance where it's actually a different brand that somebody's experiencing. So we have theming that we have to think about, and I think John's going to talk a little bit about that as he shares some context. And then finally, adoption is all over the place. I feel like if y'all were all on video, maybe some people would be excited about that just because I'm sure that others have dealt with it. But for us, where it kind of takes place is we have a lot of designers using the system, but the implementation situation varies drastically from team to team. And that causes some friction in terms of handoffs and so on. So a lot of things that we're kind of juggling as we're trying to scale a design system at an enterprise level. Okay, so enough context. You want to see the real stuff, so we're going to go ahead and dive in. I'm going to hand it off to Gabrielle, who's going to give you a bit of an intro to some of the topics that we pulled for today.
We're pumped to be giving you a tour of the Pulse design system today. One of the things that I love about working on design systems is there is never a shortage of really challenging problems for us to solve. So we've pulled together a few topics to discuss that we think might be applicable to other folks managing design systems. These are things that we found hard and we had to iterate on to get to where we are today. So John's going to kick us off chatting about design tokens, hot topic in the design system community. He's going to speak specifically about our use of semantic colors. He's also going to touch briefly on some of the changes we're making to our Figma file architecture as we're adapting to some new information. Then I'll bring us back into Zeroheight, where we'll chat about component documentation. And then we'll get into our component governance process as we're scaling as a team working on that. John, take us away.
I'm muted. Hello, can you hear me? I hope you can hear me. Someone told me.
Can.
And you can see my screen, right? Okay. Yep. Couple real quick facts about Pulse. One is it's very young still. I was hired at the beginning of 2020, pre-pandemic, And and my task was to just stand something up. So I stood up this kind of very minimal system, knowing full well that something would come along to replace it. And later in 2020, we had a couple of acquisitions, and one of those was this company, Livongo, who brought with them Figma and a design system. They started to work on it with the idea that the design system would have a plugin that would generate tokens. So the Figma would be the source of all design system styling and components and everything, and then the code would come out of that. So one of the things that we started with was the idea of semantic color naming, and we did a great job in terms of status colors, brand, like primary, secondary colors. Where we ran into problems was with the neutrals. So let me, and neutrals are really challenging. Which neutral do we use for form? Can we use neutrals as button labels? Hey, there's a lot of grays here, yada, yada. So we also had placeholder values for the dark mode, which is basically inverting the light mode, which is not recommended at all. So don't do that. That's awful. You can see here, like, okay, so we have a palette and then we have themes, and the palette and this is neutrals in our primary, secondary, and status colors. We also had a palette, but we had narrowed the use down in the theme to just 3 different values: a default, a tint, and a shade. So with neutral, we didn't have that. And one of our teams was like, hey, we work in hospital rooms, we need a dark mode. Do you support that? Answer, no. And please don't use the placeholder stuff because it's not right. So that's an ongoing conversation, but that also forced us to look at tightening our neutrals. And so our colleague John S., who's on the call, did an amazing job of looking at how to solve this issue. And one of the things we wanted was a heuristic where designers could look at the color naming or the neutral naming and be able to understand, okay, this is the color to use. If I have a primary thing or a secondary thing, what is used on that color? So it's an on style, which I think those familiar with material, the latest material, that's what they're doing, or the latest couple of versions of material. So for example, you have a background and you have an on background. And this was huge, huge, huge for us. We had been hand making styling that was hidden from users, but was needed to generate the tokens. So every component had these color chips of every element in that component that were named and styled, and then they would spit out just a raw hex value. So not the greatest in terms of management, manageability, a lot of hand crafted stuff, and also very painful. So here's our colors, you can see. And we're still, like I said, we're still working on the dark mode, but this is how this looks for primary and secondary. So you can see, like, okay, I have a very dark primary shade. There's a typo there. Or excuse me, that's not a typo at all. It's my brain typo. So you have primary tint, and on primary tint, you're going to use the shade color, which is this, but we're not going to say use the shade. We're going to say on primary tint as a way to indicate this is the color to use. There's no question, it's there, and people can move on with their lives for the most part. So benefits from semantic naming: it's easier to use, consistency across the board. Theming is easier, a lot easier, and I'll talk about that in a second. So one of the things we do is we have a foundational product that is a framework for others, and we license that. And part of our licensing agreement is that we help you style your instance. And that includes a mobile app, that includes a web-based experience as well. And then I think it's a lot easier to support modes because you're just basically, you've got the framework, you're just substituting new values in. And then accessibility as well. It's a lot easier to go, yes, we meet WCAG 2.1 AA, which is our accessibility goal for the system. All right, so how it is set up. We have our kind of core system in Figma. We have 3 files. that inform the system. So there's a style library, a components library, an icons library, and in those we also have some Figma work in patterns and behaviors that is still kind of starting to come up, and we're doing that for our documentation as well. And Gabrielle will touch on how that works, but we also have like utilities and Chromes that people can use that and put the designs in as an organization. You can, hey, here's, you know, whatever, Samsung, blah, blah, blah. So we also have this custom Figma plugin that our new development team, it previously did React, like Web React. And now we're getting it so that they can parse the output and spit out Android, React, and iOS with, and I think they're even thinking about Rails, but as a way to refer to the Figma as the official doc. You know, this is it, this is the source, and then the code gets generated from Figma. And we're even looking at going further so that when we publish the system, any of the components or the styles, that will run the plugin and uploads the new tokens to a GitHub repo. And then from there, magic stuff happens on the dev side that, frankly, it's witchcraft. I don't do that. Okay. File structure. We have a large group distributed, and like Evan said, a lot of different levels of support. We have enterprise software. We have providers and doctors who need to log in and manage things. Then we have patients. And so those systems don't look the same right now. They function, you know, there's functionality, but we also have an enterprise group that does super crazy, like hundreds of thousands of records and tables and operations they have to do, you know, member management, stuff like that. So we've got this kind of like consumer, professional, enterprise, all these levels to support, and we believe we can do it with our design system. And there's going to be some modifications, right? So if you look on the left, we've got, here's a team with the design system. So we're the core team, we have the core design system. One of the philosophies, and I should add this, we are not the 3 pixels down and over, and you know, we're not that group. That's not, we're not staffed for that, and we don't have that as our charter. What we have is, does it feel right? Does it feel like it's part of our brand and part of the experience? That's where we are. So we're not crazy about, hey, that button's 4 pixels off. It does have rounded corners in the right color. Awesome. Can you read the label? Is the label accessibility compliant? Like, is it AA? Awesome. So the structure we're trying to go to is, so this is kind of like a Figma layout, which would be, and this is one of the things we're considering. We're still talking about that, and I'll get to that in a second. But the idea is that whatever we decide the structure is, we're going to mirror that to the other teams so that everyone who works understands, here's where the design system for my thing is, that may have, it'll use Pulse, but it'll also use any product specific stuff, or, you know, they might have some spacing differences or different components that we can't or don't want to make. So this is something we're working on. So you can see there's like components, and then inside of the file, we're still working on the file structure. Do we have, like right now we just have a single component file? Do we want to split that up into whatever? So that's a thing. But then once you're into the pages of the document, those can be mirrored out to other people, like other themes, like other, you know, white label partners, etc. Okay, I want to make sure. So the other thing we're struggling with right now is Figma introduced component properties, which are awesome. However, they have their own set of challenges. The biggest benefit that I've seen is that you can dramatically reduce the number of variants that you need to support. So I'm going to show you a component that I worked on, which is not in this window. This not in that window either. It is, where is my table? Okay, this is our table, and it consists of a header, cell, like a column header, actual cells, and then an action cell with buttons and checkboxes. And this is really more for like the enterprise people. So this contains, the header has 91 variants. Sorry, nervous there. 240 variants of just the cell, 470 of the action cell. And by the way, the action cell, that is not even close to all of them. There'd probably be about 1,200 if I really wanted to like build each perfect one. And the idea is that this is a guide for you. We expect you to break this to build what you need, because its tables are insane. Okay, so we go from that to this. So I think there's like 60 variants here. So we've gone from hundreds to a very small percentage of that. And it's much easier to use, it's much easier to maintain, and it uses properties which are very similar to what developers use when they do mix-ins or other properties. It's faster to like beta test it and do everything else. So like you can see here, like we do a beta test thing. I just wanted to share this, which was not in the notes, everybody, sorry. We do when we do work on components and we make edits, we do a difference layer. So we dupe we have a set of our components, dupe that, export that, bring the PNG and layer it over the top, difference it, and then we can see as we make changes, does it mess with the base component or the core component? Very handy, and it saved my life on this particular project, which is vaguely nightmarish. I think I've hit everything. Let me just check my notes really quickly. And I'm happy to answer questions. Finally, as I was mentioning about the structure, let's go back. We're researching with our users. How do you feel components should be set up? Like what makes the most sense to you? So for example, we did a card sort with our designers and our design organization as a way to help us inform how we're going to structure the libraries going forward. And also how we structure documentation. And I'm going to hand off to Gabrielle for that conversation. Take it away.
Thanks, John. All right, jumping in and sharing the screen. Sweet. We are hosted here by the folks at Zeroheight. Thank you so much, Michelle, for having us. We want to make sure we talk about Zeroheight and what we're doing there. We've actually got some work in progress working on our documentation site this quarter. You all are familiar with the design system space, and you might be familiar with the fact that documentation can easily fall to the wayside when you're a busy team. It is one of the things that feels easier to deprioritize sometimes. And this is something that, we felt as a team. We've been using Zeroheight now for coming up on 2 years, October 2020-ish. So we've had some time to learn about the tool and kind of grow with it. And we have not always had our documentation like fully in the state that we want it to be. We always have wanted it to be a little bit better, but we recently surveyed the broader design team. And one of the top pieces of feedback we received is that our documentation was really not where it needed to be. We knew this, we heard it loud and clear from our teammates as well. Folks needed more contextual examples. They needed more information to be able to confidently use Pulse design components, foundation styles, all that good stuff in their product line work. So our teammate, John Salmon, has been leading the charge to kind of revamp our Zeroheight documentation this quarter. He started out this process by really going through and taking a cold hard look at what we've got in our system today. And I'm showing you just like a snapshot of that audit. We had, over the past couple of years, a lot of diverging architectures as we're thinking about specifically component documentation in our system. This happened pretty naturally. There were some things that we really liked, and we kind of made changes over time toward this unified structure that we see over on the left, where we have usage information, Figma information, and then implementations such as React, historically our only coded version of the design system. But we also had a lot of variation in this other kind of second column here. There were some components that are a little bit more complex, and like, oh, we need X, Y, and Z to fully address this. Or there's some components that just kind of never got updated to the newer version. Just kind of generally confusing IA for our users as they're thinking about learning how to use the design system. We also saw, and we heard from the team, we've got pretty inconsistent documentation in terms of visuals, examples, contextual examples, what to do, what not to do. All of those assets varied pretty widely from component to component, and the level of quality just wasn't there across the board. So we kind of had a good sense of what all the problems with our system were, but we knew we wanted to address this. We're moving into a phase of like mass adoption of the Pulse design system. As Evan indicated, we're supporting 40+ teams. We need to ensure this is all tightened up so that folks are confident when they use the design system. To kind of move in the right direction, one of the things that John led is he started researching other design systems that are out in the ecosystem. So if you see yours in here, thank you so much for making your work public. We took a look at some of the big names out there, lots of the public facing design systems, and we started looking for trends in what we thought was, super well functioning information architecture, really great examples for users where we thought that the level of fidelity in the assets was like what people needed. Anything we could learn about the types of content people were providing. Also anything that we thought we could kind of expand upon and do a little bit better in our system. So many weeks of work here quickly in a moment. I'm going to take you into where this is bringing us moving forward now. So jumping back into Zeroheight. I'm here, I'm in the components and patterns tab of our Zeroheight site. We've got all of our components stored here, but I'm going to show you today just our toast notification, which is demonstrating our component documentation template. So starting out here up at the top, you can see we've got a few tabs of documentation available. Usage is where everyone starts out. This is information for everyone. This is for designers, it's for developers, it's for product content, anyone else that might need to work with the design system. So general information, then we kind of get into more specific platforms. The Figma tab contains information that's really oriented toward designers who are using the Figma components in their work. Then the React, Web, iOS, Android, some of these a little bit more placeholder, but these get into the actual coded versions of the components and any usage specs that folks need to know about there. The sections we're working with here in the usage tab, we start out with a quick overview of the component. This is generally what it's for, where you might use it. In the future, this might be expanded to specific parts of our product that are kind of focused in on this component, really using this component a lot. Then jumping down to anatomy. I'm really excited about this section. One of the general themes of the past couple of quarters has been, getting up to speed with the engineering team that we're so lucky to be collaborating with now. We've learned that it's really important to have shared terminology when talking about parts of the design system. And this is our attempt to start to standardize at the subcomponent level what's going on in a component. So we can all use the same terminology for all the different parts of components when we're working together. Continuing downward in the scroll, we're getting into variants and options for the designers on the call. These align pretty well with the Figma properties that each component offers. Sometimes it's kind of the different versions of a component. So we actually store right now a large and a small screen toast notification as two separate components. But on the whole, this is the properties that are available to designers when they're using the components, and properties that are available to developers when they're using them. So here we've got screen size. We support a couple different type ramps depending on the viewport. We've got things like layout variations, type, or for other components, state variations, and then anything that's optional within the component. So this toast offers an optional description, an optional tertiary button. We can chat about how you can turn that on and off. Getting down into some of the feedback we heard from our design team, better placement, interaction, animation guidelines are all going to be living here. We've kind of settled in on this low fidelity wireframe version of component assets to demonstrate things like placement. We think this is an awesome way to provide a little bit of context without needing to maintain kind of up-to-date product snapshots and make this a little bit more general for folks to relate to. So here we've got large and small screen placement options. Jumping down toward interaction, in the future, we're hopeful that this will have either kind of visuals of the interactions via GIFs or videos, or actual coded versions here that you can play with and interact with, get that look and feel. But right now, it's just a little bit of information about things like timing or the types of content we support, things like tap targets, all that good stuff. And then further on down, I'm getting into some sections that we collaborate on with some other teams. We are super lucky to have a fabulous content strategy team in-house. They actually own this content tab up here in our Zeroheight site, which is where they store general guidelines for writing for Teladoc Health products. But here in a component page, we're able to store any kind of component-specific guidelines that we need. So in the case of a toast notification, this might be information about how to write for the titles or the descriptions or the buttons in the component. And then further down, accessibility, a little thin right now, but indicative of greater things to come. Accessibility is a very serious matter at our company. As Evan mentioned, we are highly regulated. Healthcare space needs to be accessible for everyone. And we work with a rockstar accessibility team in-house as well to ensure that our coded components are accessible, that they're kind of accessible by design. But we also need to ensure that developers who are using the Pulse components know how to use them in an accessible way, because there's only so much accessibility compliance we can bake in. It also lands with folks who are using the design system to ensure that our products are accessible to all. So greater things to come here, but a quick sneak peek of what that might look like. And then a couple last sections. We have related components here. These are components that this component might be confused for. And we provide a little bit of information about how to make a decision if you're kind of deciding between a couple of components in whatever product line work you're focused on. And then the change log, I think this is a genius addition that we stole from another design system, I'm sure, but we've been previously managing versioning and kind of our change log on the whole at a system or library level. But as we're kind of increasing adoption across the broader org, we found it's really important for us to understand at a much more granular level what's going on, so that we can have a shared understanding of where this component is at across design, dev, documentation. That carries us pretty smoothly into the next topic I want to chat about, which is our component governance process. So we're working with a new development team. One of our biggest tasks as we're kind of getting up to speed is figuring out how to work together. We're kind of growing at scale. We need to think more about the process that components go through and the general contribution models that we offer as a design system team. We are just a handful of folks serving a very large org, so it's important for us to be able to scale outward. I'm going to jump into our resources tab up here and show you kind of where we're headed with component governance on the whole. And we'll chat about a couple things in here. The process is outlined in this tab for folks to reference. We've got the different phases that components move through as they're becoming part of the Pulse design system here as tabs. Every proposal for the design system, I'm going to use the word component, but this could be styles, icons, patterns, components, et cetera, et cetera. Everything starts as an idea, and ideas can come from anywhere. That's a really important part of us as a design system team, is acknowledging that and supporting those ideas from anywhere. So they can come from within our team, they can come from product line designers or product line engineers, they can come from folks on the content team. Wherever ideas come from, we need to be able to track them over time. And the way that we do that is via our brand new public-facing Jira backlog. We're super excited to be kicking this off. This is inspired by the folks at the uk.gov team. But this is a place where we can aggregate those ideas and allow folks to track their progress over time. So starting in this idea phase, I'm going to jump into an example here. We can add information about what this proposal might entail, why it's being suggested, any examples from other design systems or from in-house work on specific products. We can add the proposer here. We can use all those great Jira functionality to kind of track its progress over time. Things start here. Then they move to our team and they move into the analysis phase in this second column. This is where we're vetting proposals to ensure that they have enough information. But this is also a time where we're taking those proposals in front of a broader group. We have what we're calling our Pulse working group, which is made up of representatives across the different product line teams. And we want to ensure that ideas are vetted by this group in order to, we're ensuring a couple of things. We're ensuring that the proposals actually make sense at the global level, that they are intended for multiple audiences, multiple platforms, that they aren't just specific to one product, but we're also ensuring that those global solutions apply and make sense for all those different audiences. So any nuances we need to add in to accommodate different groups, we can kind of address in this analysis phase and start to write the design requirements. After analysis, components move into the design phase. As you can imagine, this is where we're starting to design components in Figma and build out those components. We're doing some design testing. We're also going through some initial reviews. So we start with engineering reviews with our collaborators there. We're going through initial accessibility reviews to ensure that the design is kind of accessible by design. Even if it hasn't been implemented yet, we can start to note things that we will need to keep track of. Going through initial content reviews to think about smart content defaults and any guidelines we might need to account for. This is also where we're starting to think about Zeroheight documentation. So we're going through all these reviews, we're gathering information about the component. It's important for us to store that in one place so that when we prep to hand off to our developer counterparts, we are able to run source of truth. And we're all able to access the same information about what this component is, what it looks like, and how it behaves. So we're in the design phase now. Following that, we're going to move into our developer backlog. This is when the components are ready to be built. And then they'll move into the in progress phase. This is when folks are actually building iOS, Android, web versions of the component. Things will get queued up for a release. You'll have a kind of due date on there when folks might be able to expect this component. This is also where we do final accessibility reviews and QA testing. And then ultimately, the goal is to get everything to this froze this right column. As you can see, nothing is there yet. We're still kind of working on this process with this new engineering team. So we've previously released React components only. The next round will support multi-platform components. But the goal here in this last phase is a unified release. So true parity across design, documentation, and development, we think is going to be really key for adoption. We haven't had that parity in the past, and it's led to a bunch of confusion across different teams. So the goal moving forward is that when a component is released and when it moves into this final column, it's ready for everyone and everyone has the same set of information. Everyone can feel confident using it in product. So we've been focused on this a lot as we're getting up to speed with the new team. We're super excited to be putting it to the test now. But that's been our tour of Pulse today. Any last thoughts from the team before we jump into the Q&A section?
None here. I think let's bring on the questions.
Nice job, Gabrielle.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing. There was a lot of great content, and we also have a lot of great questions. We only have about 10 minutes, so we won't get to everything. But if you don't mind afterwards, hanging out in the Slack channel and answering questions in the webinar channel, we did get some through Zoom, which is fine. We'll just put those questions in there and then you can thread responses. But let's kick things off. So earlier on, someone posted a question. I'm unfamiliar with behaviors as part of a design system. Can you dive deeper into this?
Sure. Figma lets us do things like build prototypes, right? You can say, here's what a hover state looks like. Does it fade slowly? Does it go instantly? Do we have different types of hover states? What kind of motion curves do we use? Excuse me. So Figma will let us do this. We're still figuring out how to show this. Right now, we have a storybook that we reference in Zeroheight. So on our React tab, right now, there's an embedded storybook. And if something has like, a date picker, and what does it look like as you arrow through the dates or hover over the dates, that kind of behavior is shown in the storybook instance. And I don't know if that answers your question, but that's right now, that's where we are.
Great, thank you. Another question we got, what is the total time it takes for a new component to be created when it goes through the whole governance process?
I can take that one. It depends is the answer. So a couple things. First, this governance process is somewhat theoretical, right? So we have stood this up because this engineering team is new. And their main mission right now is to develop parity across all of our supported UIs with all of the components that we already have in React. So when it comes to net new components, we're about to do it. We're going through that process now. But that being said, as we've kind of stress tested this with the team and talked through it, one of the important nuances is the contribution model. So the reason I say it depends on what there is to start with. If it's a drawing on a literal like back of a napkin, it's like, hey, I think that this component could be cool, take it forward. That's naturally going to take every nuance that Gabrielle walked through in order to achieve, the implemented component. Whereas something that's super important to us is to allow teams to extend and augment Pulse in ways that are meaningful to solve specific use cases. So if they do that, and within a particular product line, they build a component or design and then build a component with a given Scrum team, bringing that as the contribution would follow the same process, but the steps would take way less time, right? Because very simply, when we go through design, well, we'd already have a design component. We're just going to make sure that it meets up the standards that we need it to meet to be included in the global system. And then similarly, there's already code. And so we can take that to the Pulse developers and they can vet it and ensure that it's extended into each supported UI. So that's kind of the long and short of it, is that it depends. If there's a well-formed contribution, it's a lot faster. But we're roughly trying to dial it in so that a relatively complex component can be achieved perhaps in 1 quarter. So that's maybe the ballpark.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, did you have anything else to add, Gabrielle?
Oh, the only other detail I'll add is proposals really vary in scope. So if we're adding things like a new style or a new icon, those are super quick. That only takes a minimal amount of design effort, minimal vetting usually to get it in. But when we've got really complex components, like John showed, tables, which are just enormously complex, that's going to take a lot longer. So another variable in this variable equation. So.
Yeah, for sure. And tables, that's impressive to see the table component. Okay, we got a couple questions around the custom plugin that you had mentioned earlier, John. So the question is, can you tell us more about the custom plugin you're using for the tokens? I think it's a broad question, so maybe talking about the problem that you're solving or the intent of the plugin.
Gabrielle has worked really closely with our new dev partners this past couple quarters and can speak to that, I think, on a kind of technical level. I think what we're trying to solve for is, where does the source of truth lie? It has to, and that's such an awful, like, because in reality, the truth is kind of in a bunch of different slices, right? There's in-flight work, there's future work, there's, North Star work that's even further out, and the system needs to support all those things. So what we're trying to do is, for developers, they need to have a way to fire up an environment and know they're using the correct, this is button, this is input field, this is dropdown, this is menu, this is header, whatever. And so it solves that issue with a distributed development team. Here's, if I install it and I start building things with it, it's what I'm supposed to use. It's the version that I'm supposed to be using. And theoretically through version control, we can say, well, okay, this is a North Star project, so use that version. This is a legacy in flight work, use this version. This is next quarter or next year, whatever. That's the version we're using for that. So we're still working through what that looks like, but on the Figma side. But in terms of developers, that's the problem we're trying to solve. But I think if there's any further technical stuff, like Gabrielle's probably a better person to answer that side of it.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about how it works. So as John mentioned, we store all of our styles currently in one Figma library. And that's a really important part of working with a plugin to do this, is that plugins are kind of limited in scope to what they can access. They can access information from one file. So we have this plugin that can run on top of any styles library that has this similar structure. So if we have multiple themes, we might need to have multiple libraries of a similar structure to generate one theme per file. That plugin goes through and it scrapes a couple of different things. It first and foremost scrapes native Figma variables. So things like color styles and text styles that Figma automatically creates as variables for designers to use. But it also looks for some kind of custom variables we've created using components and other little tricks. So things like border radius we're standardizing, and we're doing that via a palette and semantic use system, just like colors, but that's made up of components instead of actual styles within the Figma library. So it's scraping through, it's looking for all these different variables and frames that contain variables. It's creating a JSON file from that. And then what we're doing is we're actually transforming that for all the different tech audiences. So we've had versions that work for React. Previously, we're rolling this out to iOS, Android, Rails, etc. And the plan here, the kind of major upgrade we're going through is this was previously managed by a Figma editor. They had to run the plugin within Figma to generate this. What we're looking for now is more of a continuous integration, continuous deployment solution where we're able to kind of more readily maintain this over time and automatically integrate into GitHub repositories so that devs have a little bit more constant control and constant access. But it's a partnership with our engineering team, and they've put in a tremendous amount of effort to get it to where it is today. We're super excited to be rolling out with that as part of our first iOS and Android dev launch this quarter. It's going to be some of the foundational work that we're including.
Great. Thank you for your explanations. That's really helpful. I think we have about 5 minutes left, so I'll leave it with one question and then we'll do a quick wrap up. But there are definitely lots of other questions. So if they didn't get added to the webinar channel, we'll go ahead and add them so you can answer whenever you get a chance to. But thank you everyone for your questions so far. For the last question, someone says, thank you so much for the thorough explanation of the design system process. Could you give a few tips for those who are working on a design system in addition to their day-to-day product priorities? We don't yet have a dedicated design system team, but we're trying to work to this true parity, which seems out of reach. So do you have any helpful tips?
I can say, so split time is really difficult. Shortly after I joined, a lot of the people on this call were split time on some other things. And so one of the other changes that's kind of taken place is we have gotten kind of 100% dedication. Lacking that, I would say prioritize. When you look at that competitive analysis sort of thing that Gabrielle was kind of looking at earlier and sharing with all of you, even with regard to a documentation site, it's overwhelming. Like it feels like you're drowning because there's so many things that every design system is doing out in the community. And it's like, oh, we need to shore up our documentation, but then, they need this component. And it just feels like too many things to manage. And so I think you really have to sit down and figure out like, what are the small incremental changes that we can make over time that are going to make this a little bit better and a little bit better? And what wins can you find that will help you justify more resourcing going forward? So if you can demonstrate a small win and take that to your leadership and say, hey, look how I improved the status quo at my organization. I made execution faster or consistency of experience. That can help then advocate for a little bit more time. John, it looks like you have.
I was just going to add something really quick. So for a lot of our products, forms are really important. Form inputs, selectors, pickers, those are really critical. So that for us was where we focused our first initial big efforts was what are the things that designers and developers need right now? And let's get those out and release those. And then we can make other improvements later, like, oh, what does the dropdown look like? Or, what does our combo picker or whatever look like? So start with the basics. And I think color, type, and then if your product has specific needs, build those specific need components. and use the colors, like, you know, start to wed those together as styles.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much. All right. So we are at the end of the webinar. Thank you so much to Teledoc for taking us through Figma files, the background of your company, as well as the documentation site and everything you've done, including the governance process. It was really interesting to see. People had a lot of great questions. We didn't get to all of them. So again, like I said, we'll put them in the webinar channel, and as you can, feel free to answer however you'd like. We definitely appreciate that. And then people did ask if this was being recorded. It is being recorded. We will send out an email to all of the registered attendees when the recording is ready. We'll also provide a follow-up blog post on summarizing some of the highlights. And then if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us in the Zeros Slack community. Thank you again so much for joining us today. And thank you so much, Teledoc, for doing a walkthrough. This was really, really awesome and great to see. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.